All right, so it appears the WNBPA has issued a response to the WNBA's offer, and they have sent in a counter proposal. This is fresh off the press. This counter proposal was just sent in today, so we're going to dive into it and get right into things. Welcome to Keep the Vision. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share that channel, hit that bell notification, and hype the video as well. Be greatly appreciated. I have not looked at this article yet. I'm seeing it for the first time with you guys right here. Shout out to Alexa Philippou. She's been all over this stuff. Her and Annie Scoops, Annie Costable have been all over this thing. Here it says,
to understand why tensions remain so high, it helps to examine the numbers at the center of the debate. In earlier discussions, the union reportedly sought roughly 30% of gross revenue. Their latest revision lowers that figure slightly to an average of 27.5%. On the surface, that reduction might appear meaningful. In practice, many league officials view it as largely symbolic, arguing that the underlying framework remains unchanged. The distinction lies in the term gross. Calculating shares based on gross revenue means dividing income before expenses are deducted. Executives insist that such a system would make it extremely difficult for franchises to remain financially stable, because operational costs, travel, staffing, facilities, marketing, and logistics can consume substantial portions of revenue. If distributions occur before those costs are covered, teams could theoretically face deficits even during successful seasons. From management's perspective, this is why the revised percentage hasn't significantly altered their stance. They see the proposal not as a workable compromise but as a continuation of a model they've already deemed impractical. Some insiders reportedly interpret the small reduction as evidence that the two sides remain far apart conceptually, not just numerically. Supporters of the union's position, however, argue that focusing solely on expenses can obscure how much value players generate. They contend that athletes are the primary attraction for fans, broadcasters, and sponsors, and therefore deserve a larger guaranteed portion of league income. In their view, adjusting the percentage downward demonstrates at least some willingness to negotiate, even if it doesn't yet meet management's expectations. This difference in interpretation is what keeps talks tense. Each side looks at the same figure and draws opposite conclusions. One sees it as a token change that fails to address core concerns, the other sees it as a meaningful concession that should invite further discussion. Observers often note that negotiations become most difficult when symbolism and substance collide. Numbers are not just calculations, they are signals. A small numerical shift can carry vastly different meanings depending on perspective. In this case, the revised percentage has become a symbol of the broader divide. Rather than closing the gap, it highlights how far apart the two sides still stand. And until that gap narrows significantly, progress toward an agreement may remain frustratingly slow.
shout out to Alexa Philippou. She's been all over this stuff. Her and Annie Scoops, Annie Costable have been all over this thing. Here it says, sources, WNBPA counter proposal includes some concessions on revenue sharing and housing. I hope y'all being realistic with the revenue sharing. Y'all keep throwing this 30% out there. They said that's not doable, not possible. They are still at 15. They are letting you know what works. I hope y'all are not wasting time and getting to a point where they should just lock it down, man. Because like, let's be real here. Here it says, the WNBPA submitted a counter proposal to the WNBA on Tuesday.
The latest development didn't arrive quietly or politely, it exploded into the conversation like a thunderclap. The WNBPA has issued a counterproposal that many insiders are already calling astonishingly disconnected from the league's financial reality. Rather than narrowing the gap between the two sides, this new offer appears to widen it dramatically, raising fears that negotiations could stall entirely. Observers warn that if talks collapse, the consequences could ripple far beyond boardrooms and press releases, potentially disrupting the trajectory of the WNBA at one of the most critical moments in its history. At the center of these concerns is rising superstar Caitlin Clark, whose arrival has coincided with unprecedented attention, ticket demand, and media coverage. Many analysts believe the league is currently riding a rare wave of cultural momentum, one that could reshape its long-term visibility and commercial success. Yet that very momentum now feels fragile. A prolonged labor dispute, or worse, a lockout, could silence the excitement just as it reaches peak intensity. What makes this situation particularly tense is the perception that the proposal isn't simply ambitious but risky. Negotiations in professional sports often involve bold opening positions, but critics argue this one ventures into territory that could destabilize rather than strengthen the system. Instead of serving as a starting point for compromise, it risks becoming a flashpoint for confrontation. League officials reportedly fear that agreeing to its core elements could strain finances to unsustainable levels, while players' representatives insist their demands reflect fairness and the sport's growing value. The stakes, therefore, extend far beyond salary figures. They touch on timing, optics, and opportunity. Momentum in sports is notoriously difficult to build and remarkably easy to lose. If the current surge of interest fades because of a stalled season or public dispute, reclaiming that audience could prove challenging. Fans who have only recently tuned in might drift away, sponsors could hesitate, and broadcasters might shift focus elsewhere. That's why many insiders describe the moment as pivotal. The proposal has transformed routine negotiations into a high-risk showdown, one that could determine whether the league's recent surge becomes a lasting era or a brief spike. Instead of inching toward agreement, both sides now appear locked into positions that feel increasingly difficult to reconcile. And with each passing day, the possibility grows that this dispute could redefine not just a contract, but the future direction of the sport itself.
So y'all went from 30% to 27.5. Y'all got to get real, man. This is what I'm talking about, bro. This is a waste of time. It's a waste of time. Adam Silver told y'all months ago, leave the revenue sharing thing alone. Look at the increase in salaries. Y'all still on this. Okay, it says defined as revenue before deducting expenses over the course of the agreement, including 25% and less than a $9.5 million salary cap in year one. So they've gone down $1 million on the salary cap for year one. It says in its previous proposal, December, the union asked for the players to receive an average of.
Fresh details surrounding the proposal reveal why reactions have been so intense. Analysts who have reviewed the offer describe it as strikingly firm, particularly regarding the long-standing dispute over revenue distribution. Rather than signaling a willingness to meet management halfway, the document reportedly doubles down on structural demands that challenge how the league currently operates. This has led some commentators to characterize the move as less of a negotiation tactic and more of a declaration of principle. The central issue is sustainability. League executives maintain that their financial model must balance growth with stability, ensuring that teams can expand without risking long-term losses. From their standpoint, any proposal that shifts too much revenue too quickly could destabilize that balance. The union, on the other hand, argues that players deserve a larger share of the wealth they help generate, especially as interest in the sport climbs. These competing viewpoints create a negotiation environment where each side believes it is defending a fundamental truth. What worries observers is the timing. The sport is currently experiencing a surge in attention, and moments like this are often considered rare windows of opportunity. Marketing campaigns, sponsorship deals, and broadcast partnerships tend to flourish when public interest is high. If negotiations drag on, that window could begin to close. Momentum is not a permanent asset, it requires consistent activity, visible stars, and uninterrupted competition to sustain itself. Another concern is perception. In modern sports culture, public narratives can shape reality almost as much as actual results. If fans begin to associate the league with disputes instead of highlights, the shift in image could be difficult to reverse. Even loyal supporters might grow frustrated if headlines about negotiations overshadow stories about games and performances. Critics of the proposal argue that it risks turning a moment of growth into a period of stagnation. Supporters counter that transformative change often requires bold demands. Both perspectives carry weight, which is precisely why the standoff feels so consequential. This isn't simply a disagreement over percentages, it's a clash over vision. One side prioritizes immediate structural reform, the other prioritizes gradual evolution. Until those visions align, the league's current surge remains suspended in uncertainty. The platform that players rely on to showcase their talent depends on stability, and stability depends on agreement. Without that agreement, even the strongest momentum can stall, leaving everyone, players, teams, and fans, waiting to see which direction the future will take.
Agreement, but that in later years, teams will no longer be obligated to provide housing for players making close to the maximum salary on multi-year deals and receiving full salary protection, a source said. So they still want to get free housing for the first few years, but they want the only people that don't get housing is people that aren't on max deals, basically. That's what they are. I mean, if you're on a max deal, you wouldn't get housing a few years later in the CBA in this new proposal. Here it says WNBA teams have been required to provide housing for players.
Beyond revenue percentages, another major sticking point lies in expectations surrounding the salary cap. Reports indicate that although the union lowered its initial request slightly, by about $1 million, the revised figure of roughly $9.5 million for the first year still stands far above what league officials consider practical. Management's counteroffer, by contrast, is said to be closer to $5.65 million for 2026, a number they describe as already representing a meaningful increase from previous seasons. The difference between those two figures is more than numerical, it reflects contrasting assessments of the league's financial capacity. To executives, the lower number is grounded in projected revenue, anticipated expenses, and long-term planning. They argue that raising the cap too quickly could strain budgets and create obligations that outpace income. In their view, gradual growth is safer because it allows salaries to rise alongside verified financial gains rather than speculative ones. Union advocates see the situation differently. They believe the sport's rising visibility justifies a more aggressive increase, reasoning that investment in players can itself drive further growth. Higher salaries, they argue, attract talent, boost morale, and signal confidence in the league's future. From this perspective, a bold cap increase isn't reckless, it's strategic. The gulf between these viewpoints has become one of the most challenging obstacles in negotiations. When two sides disagree not just on numbers but on the philosophy behind those numbers, compromise becomes harder to achieve. One side views caution as responsibility, the other views boldness as necessity. Analysts often describe such gaps as structural, meaning they stem from fundamentally different assumptions. Structural gaps can't be closed simply by splitting the difference, because doing so might violate each side's core principles. That's why the salary cap debate has drawn so much attention. It encapsulates the broader conflict: how fast should the league grow, and how should that growth be shared? Until those questions are answered in a way both parties accept, the cap figure will likely remain contested. And as long as it remains contested, it will continue to symbolize the broader negotiation struggle, a struggle not just over money, but over vision.
From around Christmas, the 6-week gap caused much frustration on the player side, but the league felt the players' proposal did not warrant a response as it wasn't much different from their previous one. And for all the players, the Natasha Clouds, Nneka Guma case, who keep saying, oh, they didn't respond. No, they did respond. By not responding, they were telling you guys to get real and be more realistic. You guys have been failing to do so. Here it says the two sides have not seen eye to eye on what a revenue sharing system should look like, with the league continuing to propose one based on net revenue and the WNBPA continuing to seek one based on gross revenue. It is
months before the current tension reached its peak, league leadership had already issued warnings about the direction negotiations were taking. Among the most notable voices was Adam Silver, who publicly encouraged union representatives to reconsider their emphasis on gross revenue sharing. His suggestion was straightforward: focus instead on salary increases that could realistically be supported within the league's existing financial framework. That advice was intended as a practical compromise. By shifting attention away from structural revenue formulas and toward direct pay raises, negotiators might find common ground more quickly. Salary adjustments are often easier to implement because they don't require redesigning an entire financial system. They can be phased in, scaled over time, and aligned with projected growth. From a managerial standpoint, that approach offers flexibility while still delivering tangible benefits to players. Yet recent developments suggest the recommendation did not significantly alter the union's strategy. Critics say the continued emphasis on a gross revenue model indicates a deep disconnect between what league officials consider feasible and what player representatives consider fair. Supporters of the union counter that structural change is precisely what's needed, arguing that incremental raises alone won't address long-standing concerns about compensation equity. This disagreement illustrates a classic negotiation dilemma: whether to pursue sweeping reform or incremental progress. Sweeping reform can produce dramatic results but often faces strong resistance because it disrupts established systems. Incremental progress is easier to implement but may feel insufficient to those seeking major change. Each approach has advantages and risks, and choosing between them can shape the entire trajectory of negotiations. For many observers, the persistence of the current strategy signals that neither side is ready to pivot. League officials appear committed to protecting a model they believe ensures sustainability, while union leaders remain determined to push for a structure they see as more equitable. The longer both positions hold firm, the greater the possibility that talks could stretch on without resolution. In labor negotiations, timing is crucial. Opportunities for agreement can open and close quickly, and when they close, reopening them often requires significant concessions. That's why some analysts worry that ignoring earlier warnings may have made the path to compromise steeper. What might once have been resolved through modest adjustments could now require far more extensive negotiations. And as the timeline lengthens, so does the uncertainty surrounding the season ahead.